This video is brought to you by HelloFresh.
Lando Calrissian and poor Chewbacca never return from this awful place. How horrid!
What's up, MetaNerds? This video will be a complete breakdown of the monastery turned Hutt Palace turned HQ of the Mandalorian Resurgence, looking at its original cult builders, a tour of the interior, its location on Tatooine, and importance in galactic history, as well as the many changes over the years. The story of the palace starts 700 years before the Battle of Yavin, when a group of B'omarr monks arrived on Tatooine with hopes of establishing a sacred religious enclave. Coming from Teth, even this planetary migration was an extension of their asceticism, as they were not a force-worshipping cult like the Sith or Jedi, but would be further along in the spectrum past groups like the Dagoyan Order, as they just wanted to contemplate the nature of reality, not use the Force for good or evil, just contemplate the mystery, which they believe would be more revealed to them as they stripped away this filter of a body. They felt that sensory organs led to passion, passion led to distraction, and distraction led to ignorance. And as the individual would move through thoughts of being called to, let's say, practice procreation, or attachments to friends and family, their own ambitions, food cravings, all of this would slowly die down, to the point that the monk could be still for days, as close as they could to pure thought. And a bit of a roast of Tatooine is that it was chosen by them because it was so unimportant, useless, and devoid of any pleasure. Moving from Teth, the Order abandoned their old sites to move into the sandy Outer Rim world not on any galactic maps. I should point out the sense of humor in the Force itself, because it would be the most backwater and unobscure world, no natural resources, nothing of importance to draw people here, and it ended up being the birthplace of the Chosen One, place that his son was hidden, capital of the Hutt Empire for a time, and launching pad for the new Mandalorian movement. As if the Force itself was trolling their monks wanting to stay pure and away from the action, as these dwellings for the complete rejection of the sensory world were both on Teth and Tatooine, seemed to become synonymous with vice, filled with endless base physical pleasures of any kind, palaces to the ego of the Lord, and filled with hedonistic debauchery. When they first arrived on Tatooine with their 6 cargo ships, they sat down right in between the northern Dune Sea and the Great Mesta Plateau to the south. At this time, the locals were just a handful of miners operating out of the small outpost called Anchorhead, and the native Jawas and Tuskens. The site of the eventual palace was just a sort of wagon circle from the cargo spaceships. But as the harsh desert storms ravaged the exposed areas, this led them to dig out some of the first parts of the underground complex. And then the Tusken Raider attacks forced them to erect buildings, repurposing their ships into a fortress, space-rated blast doors for entrances, and large towers to keep an eye out for the raiders. Though a problem at first, the Tuskens did help to keep this area even more remote, as cities did eventually start growing on Tatooine. Settlers avoided this spot for the same reason they chose it, resulting in it being right in between Mos Espa and Mos Eisley. Around the same time, the B'omarr monks started transitioning into their spider robo-bodies, the ultimate form of enlightenment. A monk would purge themselves of their bad habits, then comforts, other people, then speech and even movement. The only distracting base tethered to this material world was the requirements of water and food. So when a monk was ready, they would finally purge themselves of the body altogether to be a brain automatically maintained in these creepy spider droid bodies. And in the mid-500s BBY, the Tatooine Bureau of Ethnicity and Socialization expert Alcara stumbled upon this monastery filled with monk-made horrors beyond his comprehension. He was on the run from the Tuskens, after just inciting the war between the raiders and settlers, by using his study of the natives to manipulate them into attacking a police station, and then joining the settlers to massacre another tribe. He's the reason for the blood feud between these two groups that would never fully disappear. Well, after doing that, this researcher turned insane warlord took some loyal forces and stormed the monastery, only to find that the monks actually welcomed him in. He was surprised, but they would not interfere in his operations, as Alcara used this as the headquarters of his rule as a sort of proto-daimyo, taking protection money from the settlers and keeping the peace, and of course creating conflicts whenever necessary. But he also improved the monastery and its surroundings. He cut the roads that lead up to it, and the ones out to the pit of Carkoon, reinforced everything to make this a fortress that could withstand starfighters and tanks, while renovating their tower, adding to the dungeons, and expanding the underground labyrinth. This was all done during the 34-year reign of Alcara, which came to a dramatic and abrupt end with the invasion of the Hutt. Jabba of the powerful Khajiitic, or clan, Desilagic, from the Tior family, aka Jabba the Hutt, would descend on his flotilla and make short work of this dusty regional bully. moving into this monastery fortress as if it was made for him personally. And with the Hutt's affinity for the ancient Ba'omar world Teth, it was the perfect world for this honorable Hutt clan leader. Now that we know the history up to Jabba, let's take a look inside this sprawling complex to see what secrets were packed inside. Starting at the main tower, working our way underground, back up through the main building, and out through the hangar, while also taking a look into the throne and Rancor pit. The surrounding smaller towers are headed with the dome containing various scanning equipment to detect all sorts of vehicles, receive transmissions, but also a lot of weather detection to try and predict the next deadly sandstorms and the rare rain. The main tower was filled with comm equipment, connected to the hyperwave transceiver that allowed Jabba to get in contact with the Hutt Council members all across the galaxy. Below this was an enormous holographic map that could display Tatooine, run simulations of battles or construction projects, or show other worlds of interest to Hutt negotiations. A skywalk connects the tower to the main building, and below this are the ornate stairs that the monks would use for a walking meditation, ascending and descending in complete silence for countless repetitions. This leads down to the power facility that kept the entire complex running, and would have originally been parts of the monks' cargo ships that they arrived in, but was upgraded over the years. A narrow hall takes you to a domed room with a dark purpose, where enlightened Ba'omar would chuck their brothers' brainless bodies into this pit. It's unclear if this section connects to the other chambers, or if they were only accessible from the main building. But if we move over here, we can see the abandoned mine that connects to a lecture hall that was filled with tapestries and frescoes. This was the first structure dug out by the monks, but its long abandonment may show the evolution of their philosophy, as art and intellectual conversation were deemed base distractions, stumbling blocks on the path to the Spideyverse. As this staircase zigzags upward, there's a high-quality spice processing center added by Jabba's goons, and down this main hallway we connect with the layer just below the throne room. This level was filled with all forms of creative torture credits could buy, but right away we see an interesting dynamic of the Underworld HQ. A spice thief was trying to work through a tunnel collapse, and there are several locations where we see people were crazy enough to try and dig a tunnel from some hidden place in the surrounding desert and mountains, and hope to meet up with the sprawling underground complex, and then somehow sneak around and survive long enough to steal things, from Jabba's records, to spice, to really just anything, knowing the long-lived Hutt's love of expensive things, and thinking this underground to be like a massive bank vault. Ironically, there was nothing of value here unless you count the droids. It was just filled with guards and torturers. The only thief we see that got close to anything was this long tunnel that drops right into the abandoned monk room that leads to a pair of triple doors, protecting the Ba'omar regeneration gems. This is the only time we ever hear these gems mentioned. It's unclear how anyone outside of their order could have known what was behind these doors, and likely they expected this was some prized Hutt treasure. No one knows how these gems regenerate or what they are, and it doesn't appear that the thief ever got past these triple defenses. And even weirder is that there is another set of doors here. This is all the info on this mystery, and it seems that Tatooine Jones died before he could try and dig another tunnel from around the doors. Or perhaps this was dug on purpose by the monks, as some sort of super high-level esoteric ritual. If it was a thief, it may have been before the introduction of these ground-level sensors that we see right above it, and which during Jabba's day would have surrounded the entire complex. But back to the torture floor, and past the thief that was just eaten alive by the worm burrows that would devour rock and anything in their path. We see the modest quarters of Malakili, the Rancor handler sleeping right behind the antechamber to the main pit, with thick blast-proof doors separating these areas, including the holding pen that could be filled with live prey to be fed to the beast for the amusement of the guests watching from the throne room above. Behind this was a small kitchen, chef quarters, and connected to the guards' quarters. While on the opposite side of the Rancor are these series of prison cells, a staircase connected to the throne room. And this first room was where Chewie and Han were reunited after his carbonite defrost.
Chewie! I can't see, pal!
Across from other sad souls awaiting torture, one having a room full of tubes, the other full of spikes, and a guy being tortured by blood-sucking worms. There was also some unknown tentacle species being held prisoner, and this hallway connected the organic wing to the inorganic, with a large droid processing and torture chamber here. Droids would descend into digital hell via this special droid elevator from the throne room, all managed by EV-99 and 88. Just a note, C-3PO and R2 appear to have taken the stairs, either the first round of torture or some clever stalling. This repair room allowed you to resurrect a droid for more torture, being denied even the escape of death, and this was important for getting a scrap droid back online. This chamber was allocated to a group of Jawa outcasts, which was a perfect integration as they could make use of the droids 99 no longer needed, while the Jawas could provide him with rare parts or capture new droids, with that precious information waiting to be tortured out of their circuits. It was in this Jawa wing that C-3PO was fitted with a restraining bolt, and just to meet the power requirements of all this droid activity, there was a dedicated generator block right here. Coming up these stairs, we end up at the throne room, the main event of this monastery turned fortress palace, and the only floor most guests would ever see. To get to the throne room, most would start their journey at the enormous blast door portcullis, greeted by the TT-8L droids scanning and interrogating you, and if you passed, you would usually be met by a Ba'omar monk spider. Jabba loved these things, appealing to his dark sense of humor, and when he took over, the monks were fine with the new lord, and he liked that they set the tone for the menagerie of twisted curiosities that awaited you. The major domo would be quick to intercept the guests, coming up via his personal elevator, and they would guide the guests down the steps. This area would normally be controlled by guards and droids, but eventually you would come up to the final set of stairs, past the wind chimes imported from the Hutt playground world Nar Shaddaa, and behind this wall was an ancient and abandoned pipe organ. Like the frescoes and tapestries, music was abandoned by the later monks as well. While there was a more discreet back staircase preferred by VIPs to shuttle in private entertainers and bounty hunters. This wall was lined with tables, each nook having its own spice station, and this was a pretty universal setup for dens like this, with a similar layout used in the Pikes designs over on Obadiah. There was almost always a lineup of singers, dancers, and Max Rebo's band was in residency here indefinitely, signing a lifetime contract with the Hutt. The center of the room contained the grille-covered trapdoor to the Rancor, and finally we arrive at the Hutt's throne, surrounded by guards and attendants, a supply of his favorite delicacy, live Tatooine patty frogs, and a never-ending supply of spice, while behind him there was always something roasting on a spit. Remember, this structure was intended to be a device to strip away the sensory experience, no input from the physical world, and now it revolves around a being that set himself up to be supplied with a non-stop stimulus to each and every organ. Pretty visuals for the eyes, the best musicians for the ears, drugs to keep the mind distracted, food shoved in his face, and the smell of the next meal slow roasting right behind him. The musician stage would be to this area to the right, with the enormous power drums covered in skins that just gave it a primitive look, while the wall was adorned with the great exotic beasts Jabba had killed on his orders, like the Tauntaun, Jerba, and eventually Solo. While this area was the green room for the band, with Jabba's private elevator, which was rated to ship vehicles, located right back here. If we move up through the floors, there are these larger open areas for hosting parties, mud baths, assorted spice dens, and lounges, with the equivalent of a fondue station but with these frogs, so that he could impress the entire Hutt council in this area, with this spot having the guest quarters and palatial apartments. This cutaway gives us a good look at the grid of deflector shields that completely encircle the main building. This, on top of just how thick the walls are, the parts are from starships, and that Jabba would most often dwell deep underground, and you could see why you could not simply blow it away with some gunship. Maybe an orbital bombardment could do it over time, but I kinda doubt that it, or even a nuclear blast, would easily kill Jabba if he was down in his throne room. Knowing that these were heavily shielded, and most would have intel that showed some bombardment was pointless, the building focused on intercepting potential fighters or some moisture farm or rebellion showing up in vehicles. So in between these rounded, shielded sections, there is an open-air gun deck, full 360-degree cover while the overhang makes sure you can't get hit from above, and the rounded piece below is extra reinforcement for incoming attacks. Even seen on Nal Hutta, their centuries of being uncontested and surrounded by guards actually made them and their guests too comfortable. So while you couldn't just blast the palace apart with an X-Wing or Mandalorian Commerce class, you could just fight or sneak your way in. The guards were good against your local farmers, and no other crime syndicate would dare take on the Hutt Council's wrath. But if you were outside that underworld framework, like Maul or Luke, you could take advantage of this. It is funny to think about how the main space above the entrance is the remnant of the meditation cells, little rooms like prison cells that the monks would use for sensory deprivation. There had to be at least 100 if not hundreds of monks at one point. They did need 6 cargo ships to move their entire cult here, and it isn't said for sure, but I would imagine that many of the spider droids would dwell in here, occasionally coming out to explore the rest of the palace and surrounding grounds, using this external narrow path that leads out from this area. Relics of their once appreciation for art was seen in this room, with large prayer flags on a rotating wheel, which served the practical purpose of catching the wind and draft from temperature differentials from the open area, hot air and cold air mixing, causing the spinning of this wheel and turning the prayer flags into a giant fan. Cooling vanes and more advanced air conditioning systems were eventually placed in the peak of the cupola, which also housed more maintenance areas for that Jawa clan, and a special hydroponics garden filled with genetically modified foods for Jabba. There were strains and types of food that one could only get in the illustrious Jabba's desert palace, something that would have made him the talk of the Hutt underworld, especially if you could be invited to a yacht party to visit the Sarlacc. It might seem weird that a swamp-loving Hutt would take up residence in the desert, but understanding how much of a fortress this was, that it was plenty cool down below, and in the hub of Outer Rim oddities like the brain jar spiders and tentacled Sarlacc, while being one of the main worlds of the Spice Triangle, now it all makes more sense. Visitors could land in the large open area outside the hangar, while VIPs in Jabba's own vessels were behind another capital ship-rated blast door. Behind it we find the Katana, and later the Slave One, but it would also house the Bantha II cargo skiffs. When not shuttling prisoners to Sarlacc execution, these were normally used to collect loot from the town or carry the carcasses of hunted game, with the pens for live game and storage rooms lining the entire hangar area, along another large kitchen. If you were creative, you could find a place where the Hutts got lazy on defense against assaults by foot. Fennec would make use of a sewer drain. This is a less glamorous but practical and impressive feature of this palace, as this system is under most of the palace, connecting to the many bathrooms and covered by grates so that waste or blood from the latest confrontation could be easily hosed down right through the floor, into the sewer system flowing out below. An outrageously wasteful and ostentatious display of wealth and power here on Tatooine, where farming moisture out of the air was a thing, and the settlers were forced to pay a water tax to the Great Jabba. Rumors of it being used like this must have driven a farmer to daydream of killing that green alien slug. Besides this, there was another security issue that Fett will surely be upset about when he finds. A secret Jawa tunnel they dug out to more conveniently connect them to the other palace quarters, and the massive junk pile that built up over the years. Other clans would meet up here and trade, so who knows how much free reign the Jawas have over the palace. Surely to the other clans, this was not Jabba's, but Jawa's palace. After Jabba's death, there was a short civil war, with Bib Fortuna ending up on top, only to reign for a few years before Jabba would finally kill him. As the new daimyo, Fett would seek to rule Tatooine with a different style. And although that's going to be more difficult at the start, I'm sure the long-oppressed denizens of Tatooine will come to embrace their new leader. Anything was better than the sadists like the original researcher Okara, and Jabba and Bib. So that's it for the breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. There are accounts of the spider droid monks being used by Jabba to take out some of his opponents. If you got into this droid through monkhood, they claimed you could develop a telepathy, proof that they had gotten themselves into the pure mind plane of existence. But they also knew that if one was not ready, this experience would be a kind of horrific torture unlike anything else in the galaxy, like phantom limb for the entire body, over all your senses, as you were conscious and thinking, yet stuck in the black void, no telepathy to communicate with others, and these jars seemed to keep you alive for hundreds of years. Jabba's palace was originally going to be on this world's Slicemon, whose concept art was then used for Lothal. Warts and romp rats were a thief's best friend. You could release them to set off the ground sensors, seeing if the guards ever responded or if they were paying attention, and if they were, you could just keep releasing them until they stopped checking. In the Clone Wars animated movie, you can see some of the Jawa camps, potentially a reference to the trade mentioned in the cross-section, which comes from the Complete Cross-Sections books, while other details come from the guidebook Secret of Tatooine, Inside the World of Star Wars, and in the X-Wing Rogue Squadron Handbook comics, we saw that Legends Bib Fortuna was disembodied by these monks, though his account does not seem filled with disembodied torture. In this cross-section, it has the throne room about 8 stories down, which is awesome in terms of being a real bunker to protect against a mobster warlord like Jabba, but it doesn't mesh with just about any other depiction. There is light seen pouring in, and it really seems like the throne room is just down the hall from the entrance and about 1 story down, which is how it is in the Battlefront games, and implied in the Book of Boba and the Clone Wars. You can see the light from the open door from the throne room. So as cool as I think it is for him to be deep underground, kind of ignored that detail from the cross-section. Symbolically, it's neat that Jabba was the gluttonous, self-indulgent, no-moral slob that dwelled underground in the dank, dark cave. But Boba, the man of virtue, sacrifice, and vision, has taken up dwelling in some upper part of the complex, with the open air blowing through, a much more fresh and light feel. But on that note, I cannot make any sense of where this bacta chamber / armor room is. It looks like they're implying it's in this tall tower, but even if it was in the main building, it doesn't explain how Chrysanthemum could roll down one flight of stairs from the bacta room and end up right in the throne room. Doesn't make sense no matter what building they were in. Now what Jabba, definitely Bib Fortuna, and even Boba had in common was that they made good use of their cooking droid staff and never-ending supply of delicious dishes, having it sourced and conveniently brought to them from all over the galaxy. You may not be the daimyo of Tatooine, but we can get close with our sponsors HelloFresh. They have more 5-star reviews than any meal kit company out there, and after I gave them a try, I will definitely be adding to their 5-star spree. Each week you pick from a menu of 50 different options. I picked these 3, and they arrived in a big recyclable box with giant ice packs keeping everything fresh and conveniently packaged and labeled. Everything you need is all together. You dump it all out, follow the super simple card, and I found myself really enjoying the process. Something cool about trying out these dishes that I honestly would have never tried out on my own. I actually had to Google what schnitzel was, and here I was easily making it and loving it. And we love curry dishes, but I've never actually tried to make it myself. I used to be skeptical about things like this, saying I could just buy the ingredients and follow a recipe online, but there's a reason why almost nobody actually sticks with that. I find it actually ends up being way more expensive. On top of just being too tedious to plan out a week of eating like this, adding up all the weird ingredients, going to multiple stores to try and get it all, spending too much, buying too much, and eventually throwing away too much. A University of Michigan study showed that HelloFresh's method cuts down on food waste by at least 25% compared to normal grocery shopping. And my experience is in line with that. All I needed was salt, oil, and some pans, and I had food better than the restaurant. It was all delicious, and their plans account for all kinds of diets, how many meals you want a week, and it's crazy how affordable it is, while keeping it fresh with the food all being farm to table in under a week. To make this all even more appetizing, use my link or go to HelloFresh.com and use code POG MetaNerdz16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts across 6 HelloFresh boxes, plus free shipping. I loved it. I really think you should give it a try. Go ahead and check out that link down below. If you like this video, the best way to help me out is to hit that like button, subscribe if you want to see more, and you can check out our Patreon and PayPal. Special shout out to our patrons, especially our $25 tier, Bill Payne, Oscar Jones, and Renee Flores. But most important of all, remember, one man's enlightenment is another Hutt's creepy decoration, and the Force will be with you, always.